many of you got a ticket this morning driving in?
What? No.
Nobody played with their phone in view of the police. My way of reminding you that the law is in effect fully today. In case you didn't read the headlines. Hands-free. Hands-free. Anyway, back to history. Couple things, very briefly. We're gonna collect dues on April, the April meeting. So that answers a lot of questions that some of you may have had. And cash or check is fine, or if you need to do something else, do that too, whatever. That's right. And beyond that, thank you for keeping up with your email. You have proven the value of email for communications as we changed from last week. So we appreciate that. Continue to keep your eyes on the email. Jim, you about ready?
I think I'm about ready.
Jim is trying to set his clock, which will ensure we get the cookies on time.
I'm doing my best.
Here we go.
Great. Thank you, Paul, and thank you all for coming back. Last month, I hate to have to move a date, but last month, had we met, my talk would have been about 5 minutes before I had to excuse myself for the bathroom. So I thought this was better, and again, thank you for your flexibility. Today we're going to talk about, I think we're remiss if we don't take a moment. Two things. Charles Lutz broke his leg or had leg surgery, is not here, so let's wish him well. And I think, we all woke up this morning and we have armed conflict, bombing in Iran, Israel, beyond, and which is kind of a shocker. And this is a history class, not a current events class, so I will not get into my views about not consulting Congress, hint, hint, hint. But I think we should take a moment just to keep in our thoughts and our prayers the American men and women who are at this moment in harm's way. And the Iranians and the Israelis. So let's keep them in our thoughts. Hard to find anyone who is some way or another not touched or related to someone who is now in active duty potentially. Today we're going to talk about the Kennedy assassination. I think I gave you a precursor 2 weeks ago and said, there's nothing I probably want to talk about less. It's so depressing. So the approach I'm taking is one of the basics. I don't want to make you listen to things you already know. I mean, this age group especially, we know what happened on November 22nd, 1963. So I'm going to talk about some of the people and incidents that you might not know, you might have forgotten. As I was going through getting ready, I know there's a lot of things I had forgotten. And also, I want to talk about some of the conspiracy theories. When I say some of the conspiracy theories, anyone want to guess how many this is a round, rough number, how many books have been written that deal with the Kennedy assassination since 1963? How about 2,000? Now, not all in English, varied languages around the world, but about 2,000, which is, I just found that astounding. And most of them are, in fact, one conspiracy book or another conspiracy book. They often differ with one another and are mutually exclusive. And I have opinions. I bet every person here has opinions on what happened, who was involved. So I'm going to more or less give you mine, and you are free to object, agree, ask me to revise and extend, whatever you want. And as we go along, and with this group, I don't think I have to say this, but as we go along, feel free to add your thoughts. I wanted to mention, of course, this is the president and Jacqueline, the first lady, arriving at Love Field in Dallas on November 22nd. 3 books that I have various degrees of enthusiasm about. If you want to read maybe the best book that tries to encapsulate the various conspiracy theories, JFK did not act, Lee Harvey Oswald, his name I should remember, did not act alone. There was a conspiracy. It was the CIA. It was the mafia, on and on and on. It was Castro. This actually, if you're inclined towards, the lack of a better word, conspiracy theories, JFK and the Unspeakable by James Douglas is probably the best recent book that kind of assembles conspiracy theories and supports many of them. I have not read this book, and I don't like to recommend books I haven't read, but I've read enough of it to know that it seems to be one of the better ones and one of the more recent.
When was it published, Jim?
When was it published? I don't remember, but I want to say in the last 10 years, something like that. Good question. Programming History, the Assassination of President Kennedy, Vincent Bugliosi. Now, Vincent Bugliosi is also not an historian. In fact, he was a prosecutor for a good part of his life. He is now deceased. This is the one you put as a book, a doorstopper. It is 1,600 pages, 1,600, plus the bibliography, the appendix, the addendums. It's an enormous book. Couple things. One, I said he's not an historian. Most of his life he was Bugliosi was a prosecutor, and he's the person who put away Charles Manson and his followers. So that's what made him famous. I also want to be honest and say later in life, I thought he wrote a couple of unrelated books. There were Bonkers, not related to the Kennedy assassination, but you know, he'd been around for a long time. Sometimes authors do that. When they're getting older, their books get a little crazier. But this book, which I admit I haven't read all 1,600 pages, but I've read a lot, is exhaustive, and if that's your cup of tea, have at it. By the way, Bugliosi is deceased now, so can't ask him questions. If you're going to pick one book, I would pick this. This is Case Closed. This is kind of an obnoxious title. The author admits it and says that the publisher insisted. But Lee Harvey Oswald and the assassination of JFK, Gerald Posner is just a remarkable investigative reporter, journalist. He's written some 16 books on a wide variety of topics. And this is the JFK book that he wrote it's been a while, it's in the 1990s. And it is, what he attempts to do is, he has the narrative, he's a hell of a researcher, and then he goes through conspiracy theories and explains why he doesn't think they're correct, one after another after another. It makes for engrossing reading, and no matter what you think, I think this is if I had to pick one book to read, this would be it. Posner also has the two pluses, besides being alive, and he's about 72, is that he has kept up. The book was a bestseller, got a huge amount of attention, still does, even though it was written in the 1990s. And as they have put out paperback editions, he's added new prefaces, new addendums, of things that have occurred worth considering since he wrote the book, which I think that's very good. He also has a website, a Substack really, where he also talks occasionally about developments, about all of his books, including Case Closed. And he's good. I mean, he really will try to answer more up-to-date questions or things that come up. He is so good that in preparing for today, I sent him an email and asked him a question about the Kennedy assassination. Within one day, he responded, which I was impressed. Authors don't often do that. So it's one, if I had to pick one, this is the one I would read. And let's go back now, to tell the story of the assassination. Unfortunately, we have to begin with Lee Harvey Oswald. So let's talk about this wretch of a person, this loser. You won't hear any positive things out of me about Oswald. And also the question, how could he have done such a thing? Remember, this is someone, by the way, he just turned 24 when he kills President Kennedy. His birthday had been the month before. Let's get done with the usual saga. Yes, he was raised in a terrible home. His father died before he was born. Marguerite, his wife, was not a good influence. He was in and out of foster homes growing up, and by the time he was 17, Oswald had moved 17 times and to various states. He was a terrible student. Maybe with all those moves, he didn't have a chance. And Marguerite Oswald, his mom, the only person he seemed to be kind of close to, although he hit her sometimes, she hit him. They had a contemptuous relationship most of the time. She admitted later that for about half of the time of her adult life, she had been in jobs where she'd been fired. A trend, by the way, that will continue with Lee Oswald. Something that often does not come up in Kennedy assassination books is, and I think it's very interesting, occurred when he was 13. Oswald was in the umpteenth school. It was in the Bronx. Teachers realized he was having tremendous problems, not only keeping up, but also he was a troublemaker. He tended to get into a lot of fights, and so she referred him to what's called a youth house for 3 weeks. This is where he went in Chicago if they were worried about whether or not you could even remain in public schools. He had 3 weeks of psychiatric evaluation. A man named Bernardus Harthogs, Hartlogs, who's not a nobody. He was a PhD in clinical psychology. He was an MD. He was head of his department, and he's, by the way, a Holocaust survivor. He had 3 meetings with the young 14-year-old Oswald. And in his notes, isn't later saying, oh, I always knew. No, this is in his contemporary notes. Hartog said, the young man's potential for violence is quite clear. And I should, by the way, move this. This is the 14-year-old Lee Oswald. The man's potential is quite clear. He's extensively self-absorbed. Something we'll see throughout his life that he always thinks he's the smartest person in the world, in the room, even when he isn't. And he said he also is clearly psychotic. So think of that. And interestingly, he will later, as you all know, I think, defect to the Soviet Union for a while. I think it was 20 months. And while there in 1959, Oswald, now getting disenchanted that the Soviets were not treating him with the acclaim he thought he deserved, became very depressed and tried to kill himself, cut his wrists. Unfortunately, he failed, and the Soviet psychiatrist, examined him and came to the exact same conclusion: prone to violence, self-absorbed, psychotic. I think I mentioned that by the time Oswald was 17, he had been in 14 different schools. And again, to be fair, it's hard to have a chance to do anything when you move that often. He never graduated from high school. His grades were abysmal. He read a lot. He did read a lot, and he kept to himself a lot. And by now we're seeing the violence beginning to escalate. The hitting back and forth with his mother now is turning into fistfights between mother and son. So what do? Well, your older brother was in the Marines, and he liked it.
All right.
He liked it so much. Time to restart? No.
Don't. No, don't start.
No applause.
Don't.
He followed his older brother, who had liked the Marines, and Oswald enlists. It's 1957, 6 years before the assassination. He has just turned 17 years old, and he thought, because of his older brother, he thought maybe this was a way to kind of get his life together. Well, it turned out not to be. He got along. He had various deployments, including in Japan at one point, but he didn't fit in. He didn't try to fit in. He was kind of a loner. His colleagues, his fellow Marines would say, they thought he was weird, almost to a person. And this is odd, but his nickname in his Marine, Corps unit became Mrs. Oswald. Why Mrs. Oswald? They were all convinced he was gay. Which, by the way, he doesn't seem to have been gay, but they thought he was effeminate and didn't seem to have much interest, like all the other Marines did, in going into town and meeting girls. He also was, again, 2 years in the Marines, troublesome. He was court-martialed twice. The second time he was sent to the brig. And he was, to make this short, he was dishonorably discharged after his 2 years. The Marines knew, his colleagues knew, that he kept talking about how he detested the United States and he wanted to defect to the Soviet Union. Well, that kind of word gets around, and then with the brig and so forth, it's complicated, but what actually happened is he was dishonorably discharged, changed to honorably, later changed back to dishonorably, all before the Kennedy assassination. In fact, 63, remember 63, July 25th of 63, Oswald got a letter. You remember this is only a few months from November, and he had apparently applied to the Marines to have his dishonorable discharge changed to honorable. He got a letter that said no. And apparently by the accounts of his mother and his wife, he went into a rage that lasted for the weekend, at least. Now, one of the things conspiracy theorists love to point out is, of course he killed Kennedy. The guy defected to the Soviet Union, for God's sake. And yes, he did. He did defect to the Soviet Union in 1959. He kept a diary of his experiences, which, again, for someone who wanted to be great, wanted to be famous, he called his notes, his little diary, he called it his memoirs. And as you read them, you see his views begin to change. This news story, Moscow, UPI, Lee Harvey Oswald shut himself in his hotel room today to await a decision on his request, with a typo, for Soviet citizenship. Mr. Oswald, a former Marine from Fort Worth, Texas, turned in his American passport to the United States Embassy here last weekend, which he'd done with great ceremony and contempt and, throwing it down on the desk at the embassy. I am awaiting a reply from the Presidium of the Supreme Soviet. He seems to think Khrushchev will personally deal with this, which of course wasn't the case, on my application for citizenship, and have nothing to say. Meanwhile, he said over the telephone. So he wanted it to be known, and he would be in for 20 months. He would be in the Soviet Union. Now he thought that he was going to be a hero. He thought he was going to be in Moscow. He was going to be feted. He was going to be the subject of interviews. Here's a U.S. Marine defecting and telling everybody how much he hated the United States. And he'd been maintaining for some time at his young age that he was a Marxist. After about 6 months of those 20 years, you can see in his diary that his enthusiasm was beginning to wear off. He had lost his status as this new American Marine. He had received a lot of attention in newspapers when he first arrived, But he had not met with Khrushchev or the senior Soviet leadership. He had not been given a nice dacha apartment in Moscow. Instead, he was assigned to Minsk, MINSK, as a sheet metal worker. He petitioned the Soviet government to let him attend university, and he found that there was no response. And he found that the work as a sheet metal worker was tedious. Later, he would have back in Dallas in 63 mainly, he'd have an acquaintance who was a very flamboyant guy who lived in and had connections with a lot of emigres who had been Russian, who had made it to the United States. A man named George D. Morenshit, I won't try to spell it. And his friend would say later, this is after his Oswald's death, but I thought it was interesting. He said, he was a fellow who needed attention. He was a new fellow in Minsk, a new American, a Marine, so they were all interested in him. And they lost interest in him eventually. So he became a nothing again, and he was disgusted with it. Again, the attention he expected wore off. He didn't like his job. He did marry. The first woman he proposed to turned him down. The second was Marina. Became Marina Oswald, Marina. And Marina, we think, although we don't, this is an area of some subjective thinking. We think the main reason she married him was she wanted to get to America, which would kind of make sense. So Oswald petitions to come back to the U.S. This is a Chicago Tribune little piece. Marine learns that the USA dwarfs Russia. This is June 8th. A former United States Marine who defected to the Soviet Union on his way home, Lee Harvey Oswald, this would be 62, of Fort Worth, Texas, is taking his Russian wife and infant child with him. The United States Embassy spokesman said today Oswald applied to the embassy for a passport last autumn and at the same time asked the Russians for exit permits for himself, wife, and child. The formalities were completed last week and the three left Moscow by train, he said. They were to continue their trip to the U.S. by boat. Oswald came here in 1959 after discharge from the Marine Corps. He apparently worked in a factory in Minsk until he got fed up. Now that's kind of true, kind of the American journalistic twist on it, but essentially true. Oswald gets back with Marina and their small child they've had, and it's been 20 months. And he, again, still thinks he is not getting the recognition that he deserves. He's still full of what you might call self-delusion and self-importance. And he bragged to Marina that, you just wait, when I get back to get off the plane in New York City, and then later when we got off the plane in Fort Worth, there is going to be what he called an army of reporters there to meet me, to interview me. I mean, I'm a big deal. I'm an ex-Marine coming back. His phrase was, he told me there'd be a whole bunch of reporters to meet them at the airport. Of course, nothing happened. There were no reporters who showed up. When he arrived in Fort Worth from New York, the same thing. Oswald's older stepbrother, the former Marine, picked them up, and he said Oswald's distress, anger, disappointment was clear to see that he had not received this grand welcome.
Jim,
Yes.
I guess his brother was bankrolling this travel? I mean, how did he get money to do this?
He in the Marines, he had, was known for being very miserly. And he saved, we think, about 75% of his income. Now, again, we're talking about a private, but he saved about 75%, and he used that money until it ran out.
Thanks.
Sure. All through this period, including going on, he is on the edge of poverty. He's the one thing, he can't hold a job. He's getting fired constantly, so he's having low entry jobs, and he's going from one to another. Yes.
Was there anything in embassy records that said why they accepted him back? Did he renounce Russia? Did he admit he made a mistake? Was there anything else that he could have said?
Yes.
Why did he accept him back?
He said, I made a mistake. I'm still a Marxist, but these people aren't Marxists. These are Soviet communists who have betrayed Marxism. And there are bureaucrats, they don't let me go to the university, they don't give me a job suitable to what I should receive. And that was his argument that, okay, I made a mistake. I want to come back and I want to bring my Russian-born wife and daughter with me. And he was allowed to come back. From my reading, this kind of thing, people going either way, Americans to the Soviet Union to the United States, at this point in time, was fairly common. It's the height of the Cold War, but it's not rampant, but it happened fairly rapidly. And also people have examined how quickly his application to come back to the United States was granted, and it's well within the routine range. Is that helpful?
Well, just he had said that the United States was horrible. Did he recant that statement?
Yeah, for the moment, he actually did. And what he said for people who asked him more closely was that he was very disappointed in both the United States government and the Soviet government. It was almost like, pox on both your houses, which I wouldn't think would be a good sales pitch for coming back. Yeah, but it was at a time, you might say, where having somebody defected come back, they thought to tell everybody how awful his time had been in the Soviet Union might be useful, which is not exactly what he did.
Was there anything that was ever said that maybe will let him speak and talk about how bad Russia was? Was that part of the ploy, maybe?
That was part of the ploy, and in fact, as we'll get to, in New Orleans, he did speak. People forget Oswald was actually on a radio show in New Orleans in a debate over Castro. He loved, by now, Oswald's hero was Fidel Castro. And he said, okay, the Marxism, which he claimed to be an authority of Marxism, was being betrayed by the Soviet Union, by the United States. The real revolutionary, the real Marxist was Fidel Castro. And in debates, discussions with associates or relatives or people at work, he would often voice his opinion. And we'll get to that again in a moment. But the other thing I didn't realize is that there is actually a recording of him. It's about 32 minutes, where he is debating a Cuban exile who's very anti-Castro, who's got out with a cloth on his back and a lot his family did not. And we have a transcript and the actual audio tape of Oswald in New Orleans debating. And it's interesting to listen to because he gets slaughtered. I mean, he's not a good debater. For the most part, he doesn't know what he's talking about. And he gets caught in all such of lies. For example, in preparation, the DJ, if you will, program manager at the radio station in New Orleans, I did a little research. And so at one point, Oswald was mentioned he was honorably discharged from the Marine Corps. And his debate, alter ego said, no, you weren't. You were dishonorably discharged. And well, I've never been in any trouble with the police. Well, you were in the brig twice. And you got arrested here in New Orleans for handing out leaflets. On and on, he would say things that just were lies, which again was a trait of his. He would invent whatever he needed to invent for the time, right up to the end.
Sounds familiar, something.
Yes.
Did he ever try to relocate to Cuba?
Yes, he did. Yes, he did. And why don't you, question is, did he ever try to relocate to Cuba and, where his now hero was, and he did, and I'm gonna just hold that for a couple of minutes.
All right.
Because I want to get into something kind of, try to keep this as chronological as I can. Yes.
You're making us nervous. Would you put the coffee over there, please?
Mrs. Spurlock is right, and for the record, I want to know I kept the cap on.
Oh, very good.
So there'll be no more.
He's still teachable. That's good.
But the cap wasn't on.
Somebody just said, my God, he's still teachable. I love it.
Did his Marine brother take him back, or did he disown him?
His Marine brother did, picked him up at the airport in Fort Worth. He stayed in some touch with him. The older brother that had been the Marine knew he was troubled, but he didn't share that kind of spotty history. He was a much more steady performer, you might say. But he knew his younger brother was troubled. Tried to help him where he could, but not with money. Lee and Marina were always broke. That help? This brings us to a fateful thing that occurs March the 12th, 1963.
That's the same one? That's the same one, yeah.
All right.
March the 12th, 63, he's going through a magazine. By the way, he didn't buy magazines hardly ever. He got them either a 3-finger discount or he'd pick them up in a barber shop or whatever. And he saw this ad for rifles and guns. I clipped it out March 12th of 83. He clipped out the coupon, this ad, and for $21.45, he bought the rifle. This was a Chicago-based mail house. He also, by the way, did not buy it under his name. Again, forever conspiratorial. It's A. Heidel. H-I-D-E-L. Is it one or two? No, it's two. H-I-D-E-L-L. That's how he money ordered the rifle. It's an Italian military rifle. Has a 60 millimeter Mannlicher, I think it's called Carcano, is the make, with a 4-power scope. Now, I think I'm pronouncing it correctly, but people normally just refer to it as the Carcano rifle, Carcano. Let's talk about the rifle for a moment. This is at the center of many debates, conspiracy theories. One is that this was a notoriously cheap and inaccurate rifle. Could never have been used in an attempt to kill the president. Later, when the rifle had been retrieved after the assassination, the FBI ran Oswald's rifle, this rifle, through a series of tests. Others would do it later as well, and concluded, and good morning to you as well, and concluded that actually it was a very accurate weapon. It had a low kickback, compared to most other military rifle, and it had a surprisingly rapid bolt action firing, the bolt action rifle. One FBI expert later would say, you know, it requires no training at all to shoot a weapon with a telescopic sight, and it came with a telescopic sight that you could attach. And that this particular sight needed virtually no adjustment at less than 200 yards. So keep that in mind. The bullets have also been a matter of controversy. They're 6.5 millimeter for I don't have a gun. Is that right? Millimeter, mm. Manufactured for Oswald's Carcano. They were made by the Western Cartridge Company. And again, the FBI and then others considered that the bullets were, quote, very accurate, very dependable, and they tried firing the rifle with these bullets dozens of times with no misfires. So you're going to hear a lot about how lousy the gun was, how lousy the bullets were, and there's a real question about that.
Did
Yes.
he have any marksmanship awards or anything in the Marines?
Yes, good question. Did he have any marksmanship ratings in the Marines? There's essentially three categories. The middle is sharpshooter, thank you, and he qualified for that when he was a Marine. Later on, we know he was at a firing range, and he wasn't quite as proficient, but he still came in as not a sharpshooter, but as a marksman. So he didn't do very many things right, but he was a decent shot, especially with a rifle, or with the rifle. Now that was an M1 he was using in the service. But yeah, again, another thing conspiracy theorists, some bring up, oh, he could have done, he was a terrible marksman. Well, two things. One, he really wasn't, according to his Marine records. He was actually one of the few things he did pretty well. And secondly, when we get to the actual assassination, it's believed I believe he fired 3 bullets. First one missed. Second one barely hit the president and Governor Connolly, but not fatally. And it was the third shot that killed the president.
3 shots in how much time?
That's another thing. The Warren Commission got it wrong. They had about half the time that you can really fire that particular rifle. And for example, the shot that unfortunately really matters is the third shot to the president's head that destroyed his his, brain. And, that was 5 seconds after the second shot, or plenty of time.
That's a lot of time.
Pardon me?
That's a lot of time, 5 seconds.
Yeah, it is a lot of time. So much for the rifle, and, let me go to,
Jim,
yes, I'm sorry.
Did you say, or I was a little confused, that this was the rifle he bought, but what was found, was this the rifle that was used?
Yes,
And so they did recover that same,
yes, he,
I thought
the,
you said.
the rifle he bought here, mail order, is he would use it, we know, of 3 times against people. One I'll talk about in a moment against General Walker, once against President Kennedy and Connolly, and, 3rd time against a police officer in Dallas, J.D. Tippit, whom he killed as well. So it was the same rifle. And that's a problem, by the way, when you get into conspiracy rifles, it's the same damn rifle.
With his prints all over it.
With his prints all over it, people have done all kinds of ballistic, think of how technology has changed. People have done all kinds of studies, on the rifle. Numerous people with authorization have fired it. And, people had gone up into the exact location to fire the rifle at the spot where the presidential limousine would have been. And they usually get 3 out of 3. And he got 2 out of 3. So yeah, it is the same rifle. Good question. There was a question I missed over here. No? I'm gonna call upon our president and the smartest and wisest. Paul, tell them about your experience in the, in the sniper's nest in,
Well, very briefly,
Field Plaza.
I got to stand where Oswald stood in the book depository. And there was nothing to see in terms of perspective. You didn't see a car down there that he would have shot at. None of that sort of thing. And the site had been cleaned up significantly. Nonetheless, it was still there. And that's it.
What was the distance?
Pardon?
What was the distance looking down to where it's Harvard?
Yes.
But the spot where the bullets hit is also marked, that you can see from that sniper's nest. I too have been there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And, it's an easy shot. I mean, I'm not a marksman.
Yeah, that's
I
wide
would
open.
make it.
Yeah, it was
Even
not,
with 1995 rifle, the cheapest one available to them.
yeah, yeah. And
And
you're
the
correct, the
big
shot is
question
not,
on how far it was, maybe 40 yards, something like that.
Really?
yeah.
Now,
Yeah,
those
that's
such
close.
a distance. I'm sure they got moving to somewhere.
Pardon me?
In a moving target.
And a moving target, although
That's
not
slow.
moving very fast.
Right.
And we'll talk about that in a second.
5 seconds is a lot to adjust your.
There are a lot of conspiracy theories, and yes, there is a photograph of Paul Douglas in that spot, looking out the window, so you can draw your own conclusion.
I actually wrote that book too, I just added an S on the end of my name.
There has to be humor in everything, including this grim topic. So he bought the gun, which leads us to
Oh, the doctored photograph.
the doctored photograph, yes. Many people have alleged it's a doctored photograph, and that you can figure it out by the shading and so forth. Modern photographers and analysts say, no.
He's got a pistol on his hip.
Oh, yeah, I know.
Yeah, he's got he had bought a pistol at the same time, and it's a pistol that will shoot and kill Officer Tibbet on November 22nd. On his hip, he had Marina Oswald take the photograph, and she didn't want to, by her account. And she said he'd gone in the house, he got the rifle, the gun, and he dressed in black. This is the backyard of the apartment where they were staying. And she said her first reaction was she laughed at him, which she said was a mistake.
Yeah.
What's the paperwork he has in his hand?
He has two papers in his hand. One is the daily. No.
Newspapers?
The Militant,
All
and
right,
the other is the Daily Worker.
okay.
Both Marxist, communist newspapers. And they're dated, by the way, just a few days later. And this is March 31st, 1963. People have even gone back and figured out the dates in the papers to see if they're the right dates or if they're really, no, it all, I'm sorry, but it all fits. So she laughed at him, he didn't like that, according to her. She thought he looked ridiculous. She was afraid neighbors were going to see him and wonder what the hell. And but she took four, and the four, they're fairly similar, but this is the one that became, for him and for mortality, the keeper.
What's doctored about it?
Pardon me?
What is doctored about the photograph?
Well, nothing. But again, there have been conspiracy theorists who say, well, the shades don't exactly fit.
There's something about the newspaper by his head.
Something about the newspaper doesn't seem quite right. There's even a theory that there's a double for Oswald. Some people have raised that. And again, people who make a living analyzing photographs decades after this photograph have pored over it, have used technologies to analyze it, and they say, it's not doctored. We're sorry, it's not doctored. They even can tell you what camera it was. They're looking at the photograph. Now, there's something beginning to close in on Oswald. By coincidence, let me back up. I remember this very well. This is February of 1964. So it's after, February 2nd of 64. It's, of course, well after the assassination and after Oswald's murder. This is the first time the public saw this photograph. Life bought it and put it on the cover of their magazine. Some of you may remember that. I do. I remember my parents subscribed to Life magazine. And I remember when that February issue came, it was like, oh my God. Not that we didn't think it was Oswald, but here he is with the gun.
Yeah. Was his wife, Marina, the beneficiary of the payment for the photograph?
Yes, she was.
Yeah, I bet
She was.
paid.
Marina got paid. She got paid for her story a few times. Marina, by the way, was later, in a couple of years, remarried. Primarily, I think, to get her last name changed and lived quietly, but she stayed in the Dallas area.
Really?
Very surprising. Her husband died fairly recently, in the last few years, her second husband. She still is alive, she still lives there.
How about the daughter?
Yeah.
How about the daughter? I don't know anything about there are two children, because one was born right before the assassination, and one they brought with them from Russia. I don't know. That's a good
It's
question.
probably best that we don't know.
It's probably best that
Probably
we don't know.
delivered that we don't know.
She probably grew up to be a squeaky from, you know.
Right.
we just, I don't know, I'm sure someone does, but, I do remember, I would have been a teenager, bang, when I saw this cover of Time. It was quite shocking. Things are beginning to also, close in a little bit. And now we get into, gee, what could have been, we could, in some ways, we came so close to catching him. On the same day this was taken, March 31st, there was a special FBI agent. His name is James Hosty, Hosty. James Hosty was the FBI agent in charge of these sorts of cases, you might say, in the in the Dallas area. When I say these kinds of cases, his forte was investigating extremists and extremist groups, like that right-wing nut General Edwin Walker. That was one. He also had, but left and right, it was sort of his specialty, and also part of that was espionage. People who might have some connections, especially to the Soviet Union. Now, the Oswald had an FBI file. Why? He'd been to Russia. He had an FBI file. It had sort of exhausted itself and had been closed same day as the photograph, March 31st, 63. Special Agent FBI James Hosty recommended successfully that the Oswald file be reopened.
Ooh.
And it was.
Just circumstantially he did.
No, the reason he did is that, it's like anything else. You have snitches, people on the street, and he had picked up information that Oswald was on the mailing list of the New York Daily Worker, Communist Party, Soviets. He thought that was kind of odd, and he also learned from his existing file about the dishonorable discharge from the Marines. And of course, a trip to the Soviet Union, the short-term defection. He also picked up from someone in Dallas the information that he had apparently been handing out leaflets in the Dallas area. And when I say Dallas, it's really Irving, Texas, which is a suburb of Dallas. Isn't that where the Cowboys have their stadium? I think it is, yeah. But not then. And he also picked up from one of his informants that he'd been seen handing out pro-Castro, anti-American pamphlets on the streets of Dallas or Irving.
Did he know whether he was armed? Would he have gotten that from the street sources? Oh, yeah, guys got guns.
I don't think he knew that he was armed, although having been a former Marine, it would not be a surprise that he was. So Hosty, again, he reopened the investigation. Keep track of this guy, Oswald. What's going on here? He also, again, continued with this, he had 25 to 40 cases at any one time, typically. And he did two interesting things. One, he continued to monitor General Walker, Major General Walker, who was a rising political figure, far right, and wanted to run for governor, and said a lot of racist, pro-segregation kinds of things. And so he was monitoring him, and he also took it upon himself after they'd activated Oswald. He got the old Oswald files sent to him. And he went out to see Marina Oswald. Now at this point, they don't have a home. She's living with another lady, Ruth Payne, that I'll talk about after our break. But she's there mainly because she's about to have a baby, and Ruth Payne is trying to be help to her. And she's very leery of Lee. They're estranged. Lee and Marina are estranged. And, 1 second. So Hosty goes out to interview Marina Oswald. This will lead, we'll talk about his brief interview after lunch, after cookies. But he also, the fact that he did that is important, and also it's important that Oswald heard about that an FBI agent had come out and talked to his wife. Can you guess his reaction? And by the way, we have notes of contemporary notes of all this, including going out and meeting. So I see it says 0 on the clock. So if you want to know how this saga turns out, 10 minutes or less.
Brief word from our sponsor.
Yeah.